talk about the midbrain and the forebrain today. I thought it was interesting that they included in the video points there about the cerebellum. When it talks about memory, we think about memory kind of sometimes initially as just one big concept, but it's really broken down into two different types. You got your declarative memory, which is more of like memorizing dates and facts, those type of things, or names. And then you've got your motor aspects of memory, right? Like coordination and being able to do some motor functions, and that's more towards your cerebellum. That's why HM was able to retain that stuff. So it's pretty good insights there from the video. All right, let's get into the midbrain today. These structures they function as a relay station between the hindbrain and the forebrain. When we get to our study later on in the semester on sensation and perception, there's this concept called transduction. Where your afferent neurons take in the sensory stimuli that you're surrounded by, get to the interneurons, go to your spinal cord, goes up to your hindbrain, and then it's going to have a process in which it's going to change from a neuronal impulse to a cognitive thought. So through the midbrain, you have this process of transduction where that takes place, neuronal impulse, electrical impulse, and becomes a cognition, becomes eventually a perception because of that. So the midbrain plays a big role in that. So we have two key parts with the substantia nigra and the limbic system. The limbic system is actually broken down, you can tell from that video that we watched with our Word of the Day context, into two other parts, your amygdala and your hippocampus. Okay, and we'll get those here in just a second. So let's talk about the substantia nigra for a second. What I want you to remember about the substantia nigra is unconscious motor function. So it's kind of like your cerebellum in that it is a little bit towards our unconscious aspect. Most of the things that go on with our hindbrain is unconscious. But with your substantia nigra, I want you to think about a couple specific examples. Riding a bicycle. Think about, you may want to write that down as an example here. Learning to ride a bike. Okay? So, how many of you guys have ridden a bicycle lately? For some reason, high school students don't ride their bikes. Oh, you have, Ryan. Okay. A lot of us don't, right? It's like we're too cool for riding bikes anymore. We got ourselves a vehicle, and that's my means of transportation anymore, okay? Well, think about it this way. It's been a long time since you've ridden a bike. If I put a bike in front of you, would you be able to ride it? Yeah. Yeah, right? Even though it's been an extended amount of time. It's not like you have to go through that process and relearn how to ride that bike. And the reason why, physiologically, that we're capable of doing that is because of the substantia nigra, right? If we didn't have this part of our brain, essentially we'd have to relearn things over and over and over again, okay? So it keeps track of those skills that we acquire over the course of our life so that we can retain it. It makes life much, much easier then. Okay, so unconscious like motor functions associated with our substantia nigra. It does take a note to talk about Parkinson's disease up there. You guys know what Parkinson's disease is, right? So somebody with Parkinson's disease, how would you describe it? Because you can actually see it. Somebody with Parkinson's disease, right?
Like it progresses over time and they have tremors in their hands.
Yeah. It's like motor functions, right? The tremors, the herky-jerky type of behaviors there. So I think of, I believe Muhammad Ali had it, right? And then Michael J. Fox. You guys know Michael J. Fox? Back to the Future, guys. If you ever seen, it's an older movie. Take a chance, watch that if you ever get a chance. But he has some herky-jerky movements because of Parkinson's disease. So you can see the neurons have broken down, right? In this particular case, right? So the substantia nigra, it's called nigra because it's got a darker color to it, so it's kind of disappeared here, disintegrated, meaning that it's not fully functioning. So the coordinated body movements, right, gone, right? So it leads to this herky-jerky type of fashion, which is really unfortunate, especially with like Muhammad Ali. You think of him as being one of the most athletic, skilled, fluid kind of guys, right, that we've ever seen. His abilities, just extremely impressive, right, as an athlete. And then it just deteriorates that way because of the Parkinson's disease with the substantia nigra. All right, so I've already shared that with you. All right, let's get to the limbic system. Limbic system has two important parts, the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala, we'll start with this one. I think I've mentioned it already. It's our emotional center of our brain, and it's irrational. I'm going to write that down. Emotional and irrational. This is the part of the brain that a lot of adolescents, people your age, teenagers, they revert to using this part of the brain because your prefrontal cortex is not fully matured at this point in time in your life. Okay? So what does that mean? That means that we have a tendency to make some irrational decisions sometimes. I was actually reflecting upon this a little bit with my global culture student the other day. We were doing an activity where I wanted them to have an emotional engagement in the stuff that they were reading, and we were going through a process on how to do that. And I came up with I shared with them the story. I may have shared this with you before, but people your age group, we have a tendency to be a bit irrational with the things that happen to us in life. One thing that we focus on a lot is our significant others, right? We think about them quite often, and if we happen to find ourselves in a fairly good relationship, we get really excited about it. And we don't just think about the here and now. A lot of times we think about the rest of our life, right? We get, over dramatic about those things, and it can get to be pretty extreme. So you start thinking like that, and then a couple days pass, and things start deteriorating. When they deteriorate, they go bad fast, right? And when they go bad fast, the breakup comes inevitably, right? And then you start thinking things like, man, I don't know if I can go on, right? It gets the best of you. It's devastating, right, when that happens. And the reality is you've been, with that person for a week, right? So why does that happen? And the reason why that happens is because of this. You're using this irrational, emotional-driven part of your brain to make all these decisions, to be thinking about, your life. So, a lot of times, you at this point in time, you have a tough time struggling, being on the same page with your parents sometimes. Your parents want something, right, and you want something else. And a lot of times that's because your parents are thinking about with the rational part of their brain, because their brain is fully matured, and they're seeing the bigger picture, right? They're seeing the consequences of the actions and the decisions that you're making right now. And sometimes you thinking with your amygdala, you can only think of the right here and right now, right? And it becomes irrational. And so there's a lot of separation between what your parents want and then what you want, okay? And you just say, hey, I'm not physiologically capable, right? So this argument's gonna end and you can move on, right? So it plays an important role in emotion, especially negative emotion, your amygdala does, and it contains memories of past bad experiences. So the hippocampus plays a big role with memories. The amygdala does a good job of playing a role with memories as well. Sound good? If you have an emotional experience with something, you're not likely to forget it. So I was talking to Mr. Wells. You guys have fun doing these things, or at least their assumption is that you enjoy doing this neurotransmitter band type of stuff. And the idea is that with your emotional engagement with it, the neurotransmitters and their functions are going to stick. Okay? I know Mr. Hantak did an activity a couple of years ago. He had some challenging concepts in physics or chemistry class that students were struggling. So he would have them pick up the phone, and they would prank call another teacher in the school. They would shout out the equation or whatever the content was, and then they hang up on that teacher, right? And they would do it in front of the entire chemistry physics class. So it was kind of embarrassing, right, to do that. And in that process, with that embarrassment, that's an emotion. So what you're doing is you're attaching the content of the physics chemistry equation with the emotion. It's much more likely to stick. Sound good? So if there's some boring content out there, somehow you got to scare yourself into remembering how, make an association with some type of fear or other type of emotion with that content. It's much more likely to stick. All right, damage to the amygdala. This concept is kind of interesting. I initially thought of it, man, this is like, you guys talk about Thanos over here, this Marvel comics. I thought of it kind of like a superhuman characteristic, like being able to fly or something like that. Because what that means, if you don't have your amygdala, what happens to your fear? It's gone. You're fearless, right? And I think about the things that we, keeps us from being successful in life, and a lot of it comes with anxiety and fear. We don't do things because we're afraid of what other people are going to think about us, right? We're afraid of failure is what usually get the best of us. And so from my mindset, hey, let's get rid of the amygdala. Boom, we're good, right? We'd be more successful than anybody. But the reality is, we'd probably do something really stupid and kill ourselves as a result of not having your amygdala. You would jump off a building or, run out in front of cars, something like that, just something crazy, stupid. They did some experiments with rats and cats. They removed the amygdala from the rats, and what do? They just start walking up in front of the cats, as if there's no danger there, okay? Of course, the cats would get the best of them, okay? So it's good for us to have a fully functioning, healthy amygdala, okay? The hippocampus, like we was talking about with our word of the day, it's located in our interior temporal lobes with the limbic system. If destroyed, you won't be able to remember any new personal or cognitive information. So you remember, write HM out to the side there to reflect upon him. And it does help us to adjust to new environments. We'll talk about that here in a second. So again, with HM, if he was exposed to something, like read a newspaper, then he walked across the room, he came back to that newspaper and read it a second time. The second time he read it would be as if it was the first time, right? He wouldn't be able to remember anything else in the past. Now, with HM, he could remember anything in his past, right, up to the operation. But anything after the operation, he couldn't acquire any new memories thereafter. Okay? Has anybody seen a movie that kind of sounds similar to that?
Yeah.
What's the movie?
What is that? 100 First Dates?
50 First Dates.
50 First
Yes.
Dates, yeah.
Yeah, you're good there, Michelle. 50 First Dates. So you may write that out to the side. That's a good movie reference to make a connection here. She had this, car crash, right? So we're assuming she had damage to her hippocampus, not fully functioning. So she could remember everything up into that point of the car crash, but after the car crash, she had a difficult time acquiring new memories thereafter, okay? Because of damage to the hippocampus, okay? So it's a really important part of our brain. And I wouldn't say, you remember when we talked about sleep and dreaming the other day, when we said pons was a key component of it? But we said that there's other parts of the brain that are associated with sleep and dreaming as well. Same thing with memory, right? The hippocampus is a key contributor to the acquisition of memories, but it's not the only one, okay? There are other areas. The amygdala plays a role, right? Your cerebrum's going to play a role in all of this of acquiring new memories as well. Sound good? Okay. One last thing. This where it says helps adjust to new environments. You guys remember when you were taking a shower in the dark the other day? You guys remember that? Okay, because y'all did it. You're using your hippocampus to be able to complete that task. Because what are you doing? You can't see it anymore, so you can't use that particular sense. So you have to memorize, you have to think back and visualize in your head, where do I have the shampoo bottle, right? Where do I, what's the structure of the bathroom in and of itself so that I don't hurt myself, okay? You're using your hippocampus because of its ability to understand spatial arrangements there. They did this study on London taxi drivers. You may want to write that down as well. And they went in and they took a look at the size of their hippocampus in comparison to regular individuals. And the posterior portion of their hippocampal regions, that means the rear portion of their hippocampus, was exponentially larger than the average individual. Exponentially larger. And they're thinking, why is theirs so much bigger than everybody else's? And the reason why, if you're a taxi driver, this is much earlier before they had all this GPS stuff. If you're going to be successful as a taxi driver, you have to know where everything's located. You have to have the map in your head, right? And so essentially they're doing push-ups, mental push-ups with their posterior portion of their hippocampus all the time, okay? All right, so there's the stuff on HM. All right, let's get to the forebrain. So you got hindbrain, midbrain, forebrain. And again, this is where we're getting closer to, think about midbrain, forebrain, this is more of our mammalian brain. So hindbrain, reptilian brain, forebrain, mammalian brain, so another level. So we're thinking about consciousness, okay? Our sense of reality, self-talk, those type of things that we're aware of is more towards our mammalian brain. Hindbrain, not so much aware of, unconscious. So keep that in the back of your mind. Two important parts associated with our forebrain, thalamus and hypothalamus. Right, these are getting much bigger. Here's your thalamus. Right, your hypothalamus is much, much smaller here. The thalamus, fairly large, shaped like an egg, affects our ability to learn new verbal information. So verbal acquisition with our thalamus, key point there, aids in the production of language. So a lot of stuff associated with verbals here in language with the thalamus. It does regulate our sleep cycles, so you may want to add that. That's something a little bit different. So essentially when we get to our card game assignment, and the thalamus is an opportunity or is one of your options to include in your card game assignment, I would probably be more apt to say the thalamus is used when somebody's having dialogue and conversation with one another, okay? Or you can be able to interpret what somebody else is saying, okay? I would encourage you to go that direction rather than sleep cycles, right? So again, this is pons working together with the thalamus to help us with sleep. You guys know what sleep cycles are? So every night you go through a period of maybe 4 or 5 cycles, right? And initially, your sleep cycle, you have this section inside of each sleep cycle called REM sleep, right? REM stands for rapid eye movement. If you ever looked at somebody that's watching them sleep and they're actually dreaming, you can see their eyes going like this underneath their eyelids, and they're moving, okay? That's a good indicator that they're actually dreaming. Now, your REM sleep in the first cycle is going to be fairly small. The second time you go through that cycle, it's going to get a little bit bigger, and then bigger and bigger as you progress throughout the night. The best time to dream or to take notes of what you're dreaming is right before you wake up. That's the time in which you get the largest section of your REM sleep. Anybody familiar with the Fitbit stuff and all these other technology stuff that's there? It actually, I wear it while I sleep, and it keeps track of my sleep cycles that way. It gives me an idea how much REM sleep I've had over the course of the night as well. And again, it all relates back to our thalamus. Hypothalamus, last one. It is extremely small but powerful. That may be something that you want to write out. Small but powerful. Gives you a good heads up to think about its functions. It only weighs 2 ounces, regulates hunger, thirst, sexual behavior, and body temperature. So these are some powerful things. It also contains our biological clock. So you guys ever took a day off of school or had a holiday and then you end up waking up at the same time, right? Because you got yourself in a routine, you've got this biological clock going off, and you always wake up at the same time, okay? That's your biological clock, okay? You got Kobe Bryant there. He needs some Gatorade to, satisfy his needs that are coming forth from the hypothalamus, okay? We'll talk about the hypothalamus and its 2 parts, the lateral hypothalamus and the ventral medial hypothalamus, a little bit later in this semester when we get to sensation and perception, but it talks a lot about thirst and hunger, these primary drives that really do have an effect on our daily lives, okay? All right, that's our notes on the rest of the brain. You guys got any thoughts?